British history until 1783, the year the United States was founded, by the way. Start off with the Middle Ages because England, rather the Kingdom of England, was founded by the Anglo-Saxons during the Middle Ages. Uh, and Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, by the way, were Celtic at the time and were not included in England, were separate countries entirely, had their own kingdoms perhaps. The Viking invasions, by the way, took place between 793 and 1066 in the Anglo-Saxon period. At one point even, the King of England was a Danish king who was also the King of Norway. So all of these three, closer to the end of this Viking period, were in a personal union. The Norman invasion of 1066 is very central to British history. That was when William the Conqueror, who was Duke of Normandy, this part of France here, conquered England. The last successful invasion of England, really. England thereafter conquered Wales and Ireland, but never conquered Scotland, though the English had a significant cultural influence over the Scots. By the way, take a look at this map. You'll see that in this period also, the King of England controlled many territories of France. Makes sense because, William the Conqueror, the Norman dynasty, were from France originally. The Magna Carta is this very famous document that I think many people assume to be kind of the constitution of Britain today. It really is no constitution. Britain has no written constitution. But this document, nevertheless, led to the establishment of the Parliament of England. This is English history. Elizabeth I was the very famous monarch of England between 1558 and 1603, a very important period for England at that time. She was daughter of Henry VIII, who was the first Protestant monarch of England, and very famous, of course, for having several wives whom he divorced. Anyway, she was one of the daughters of Henry VIII, his second daughter. He had no sons. The Royal Navy, during the rule of Elizabeth I, beat the Spanish Armada in 1588, and that marks the beginning of the English Empire, I would say, with its very powerful Royal Navy. Parliamentary democracy is truly one of the important things that Britain has given the world, and it's a complicated history, so make sure you understand this. England and Scotland, first of all, came together, as it were, in a personal union when Elizabeth I died and she had no children. Her closest heir was, in fact, her cousin, who was King of Scotland. He was James VI of Scotland and then became James I of England. So that's the personal union of England and Scotland, 1603. The Civil War in England and basically Scotland and Ireland as well was this very terrible war that lasted for quite a few years between Parliament and the king. So a civil war there. The king ended up being executed, and then England, with Scotland and the rest, became a republic called the Commonwealth at that point. The monarchy, however, was restored in 1660, but the king, a later king, was ousted by Parliament in 1688 in what was called the Glorious Revolution. What happened was Parliament invited the daughter, Mary, of the king, and her husband, William, who was Dutch, to become new monarchs, and they, the following year, signed the Bill of Rights, which gave power to Parliament, and that's sort of the initial birth of parliamentary democracy, but it has a more gradual history as well. There were two factions in Parliament, the Whigs and the Tories. The Whigs were more for parliamentary power, while the Tories were more conservative, more allied with the king. Anyway, Robert Walpole became the first prime minister in the 1700s and the first truly parliamentary prime minister, meaning he wasn't appointed by the monarch on the monarch's will alone, but he had support from the majority of Parliament and therefore could become prime minister. And that is what parliamentary democracy is in the world today. English colonialism now, I mentioned this previously, Elizabeth I and the time of her rule is when England became a global power. The first colony was Newfoundland, actually. That's an island off of Canada, off the coast of Canada, in 1583. And Elizabeth also founded the East India Company in 1600 to start a very slow, gradual colonization of India. Englishmen settled in America from the early 1600s, so the first major colonies there were Virginia and Massachusetts. Here's a map of the British Empire by 1660, and you'll see that they had territories already at that point on all of the world's continents. England and Scotland finally merged into the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707. From 1603, they were in a personal union. They had the same monarch, but they also had separate parliaments. But in 1707, they merged. You got this flag, and you can start calling them Great Britain or just Britain. And then the Scottish Parliament was disestablished, and the Parliament located in London was the only one. The East India Company conquered more and more of India after 1757, particularly. It was the time of war between France and England, or Britain I should say now, after 1707, and basically most of the French colonies went to England at that point. The British became major slavers in the 1700s as well, and of course the Atlantic slave trade, and transported slaves particularly to their plantations in the Caribbean. And here's a map of the British Empire at this point in time. The 1700s was also the time of the Great Revolutions. The Industrial Revolution started in England. This was about innovations for mechanizing, spinning, and weaving of textiles. So the textile industry was the first modern industry of the Industrial Revolution. The first water-powered textile factory, for instance, was from 1771, so you get sort of a time frame here. James Watt, very famous for his steam engine. He didn't invent the first steam engine, but he did make it more efficient, and that was in 1775, which also was the start of the American Revolution. What you need to know here shortly, in a few words here, Britain levied new taxes on the American colonies to pay for the 7 Years' War, which was fought between Britain and France, among other places in North America. But this phrase you can see here, no taxation without representation, sort of encapsulates the sentiment of the American colonists that at this point in time they felt it was unfair for them to have to pay taxes when they didn't have an opportunity to send people to represent them in this is a picture of the House of Commons and Parliament in London. A map that shows you the extent of the British rule in North America, by the way. The Boston Tea Party was in 1773. This is central to the beginning of the American Revolution and the American Revolutionary War, which is really what we mean when we say American Revolution, I guess, was between 1775 and 1783 when Britain finally recognized the United States as a country of its own. Included, of course, these first 13 original English colonies, or / British, after 1707, which became the United States with George Washington as its first president. And thanks for watching. Make sure you catch my next video on modern British history.